everybody, my name is OJ Whatley, and this is Second Time. Today, I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite Panerai watches, and a watch that haven't seen too many of, unfortunately, because there was only 60 pieces made, but it's the Panerai PAM21. Sort of one of the most one of those watches with a mystique all its own, because there's been so few of them in circulation since they were made in 1997. So, talking about the PAM21, there's a couple reasons why I'm so enamored and why I like this Panerai so much. Aside from the most obvious feature, which is the fact that it has and is powered by an original new old stock Rolex movement, there's really a great story that goes along with the PAM21. So the story goes that Panerai is on the brink of bankruptcy and gets purchased for some number less than $2 million. This is a time between 1995. So imagine Panerai being sold for less than $2 million. And when the company that buys them, which is essentially Cartier under the sort of auspicious of the Vendôme luxury group, right? We didn't have the Richemont watch group at this point. So you had the Vendôme luxury group, which was led by Johann Rupert. Through Cartier bought Panerai, and again, the number was something under $2 million. When they took possession of the company, they unearthed 60 new old stock Rolex movements. The first question is, what the heck is Panerai doing with Rolex movements? This is 1997 or 1995, somewhere in that time. So the interesting thing about, Cartier coming in and buying Panerai and having these 60 Rolexes, it's like, Jiminy Christmas, what is the association between Panerai and Rolex? Rolex doesn't have an association with any other brand. What's going on here? And so what it did was it really pulled back the covers to this historical relationship between Panerai and Rolex, which was kept under extreme wraps. Why was it kept under extreme wraps? Because as the Panerai advertisements say, it was a military secret. So Panerai, in the early 1900s, while it started as sort of a watch company, had sort of evolved more into a mil-spec provider. So it was a provider of military equipment, and in this case to special forces. And their prowess was in making sure things glowed in the dark. So in the 1900s, in order for something to glow in the dark, it had to be radioactive. If it was radioactive, it was unstable and dangerous. Panerai was able to create proprietary systems for putting this radioactive material in tubes and painting it on dials so that it would be reliable, so that you could make sure it wasn't dangerous and it could be contained, and that it could be used in underwater tactical situations. So Panerai, under this basis as a mil-spec provider, was able to buy cases, dials, and movements directly from Rolex in what now is essentially an unheard of situation or relationship between the two companies. So in releasing this PAM21, again, this was Angelo Bonatti's reminder to the world, hey, we are a pretty special company and we have a pretty special history, along with an unparalleled relationship with a giant in the watch industry, a la Rolex. And so, to me, that's what the PAM21 represents, is this was their grand opening. This was their grand reveal to the world. And a very subtle message that made people, again, peel back those covers, dig deeper into the records of all of these special force military instruments and the like, only to see that Panerai was behind them on a very limited edition and mil-spec basis. The world doesn't really know about Panerai. In fact, the only people that know about Panerai are mostly Italians, because this was the company that made the special force watches, the watches for the special force military commandos, the Exmos flotilla and such. But again, this is 1997. You don't have the internet, you don't have the dearth of information. nor the sharing of that information. So it's sort of like, huh? Anyways, Panerai proceeds to create a special edition, their first Panerai PAM reference special edition, the PAM21. They make 60 pieces, which they sell at $30,000 each. Now, $30,000 in 1997 for a company that 3/4 of the world has never heard of, and yet the story goes that they sold out in less than 2 months on that watch. Now, up to this point, the average price of a Panerai watch was anywhere between $250 and $1,500. And this includes those watches that were made in 1945 and 1936 that had actual Rolex movements. So anyways, Rolex proceeds to put out 60 pieces at $30,000 each, $1.8 million, and recouped their entire purchase price of Panerai with that one watch. Panerai at the time is being driven by Angelo Bonatti, who is the CEO. And I think it's pretty amazing that they were able to release these 60 pieces as a special edition. But more important than the release is what these watches represented. You know, I contend that the PAM21 set the precedent for the way in which special edition watches in the future, and I'm talking 5 and 10 years out from the release of this watch, would be packaged in terms of their provenance, in terms of their packaging, the oversized box, the burlwood packaging, even the desktop figurines that you could put on your desk and show everybody that you were a Panerai enthusiast. Again, we're talking 1997, and this is a watch that is released with 2 case backs. I would suggest that this was the first watch that was released on a commercial basis with 2 case backs, and the only other brand that I can think of offhand that released a watch with 2 case backs was Patek Philippe with their perpetual calendar watch. I think it was the 3940. But, the whole idea of 2 case backs at the time, 1997, what are you gonna do with 2 case backs? First of all, why would you want anything other than a see-through case back on your watch, especially, when it's housing and showcasing your Rolex movement? But Panerai had the amazing foresight to include a special tool that would allow you to essentially play doctor in your house and change out your case back at will. I think that to date, the PAM21 is still the only watch in the history of watches to be released with both 2 case backs and its own case back opener, which to me represents a very pragmatic, practical, but also a very sort of interactive approach to their watch. And we'll see this trend, not as far as the 2 case backs, but in terms of the presentation, the documentation, the provenance, as well as, what I call the tchotchkes, the swag, the desktop figurines and such. This is what would sort of drive the company for the next 20 years. Again, 1997, your most expensive watches were Patek Philippe still, and those most expensive watches, at best, they had an oversized box that opened like a closet. 1999, 2000 to herald the millennia, you had Patek Philippe come out with special edition watches that had a special coin, that had a special holder for the coin, and that had, certification and such, but never anything along the lines of what was produced with the PAM21. Additionally, what I love about the PAM21 is it's a 48mm platinum case. Again, 1997, the average case size of a watch was like 36mm. 38mm, 40mm was gargantuan, and that was occupied, I think, by Panerai, Breitling, who was making the biggest watches at the time. So a 48mm watch is like an audacious case size circa 1997, and yet these watches sold out within the first couple months of being released, and I don't think there was even a press release to mark the release of these watches. And so one of my biggest questions and one of my biggest mysteries is, where the heck did all these watches go? And even more importantly, where are they today? In my tenure of 20 years of being a watch dealer, I've seen, held, and or owned 4 of these pieces. And of that 4, there was only one that was complete with both case backs and the case back opener. And again, to me, that's a huge mystery, because all these watches were released the same way, and yet either people didn't appreciate the extra case back or the tool or the presentation, or maybe they just put the watch on their wrist and went with it. But the bottom line is these just aren't around. You don't see them. You certainly don't see them complete. And so for me to find a complete specimen, a complete example with both case backs and the case back opener and the special edition certificate and the special box and the figurine is like a rare treat. So one of the interesting things about the PAM21, it's got soldered in lugs. It's got fixed lugs, which has always troubled and annoyed me because the only way to change out the strap is to cut the one that's on the watch and to actually sew a new one on. It's either that or put it on a NATO strap. So funny enough to me, the PAM21 is quite possibly the least practical watch I've ever owned for two reasons. Number one, it's got those fixed lugs. And number two, in sticking with Panerai tradition and in sort of their evolution and DNA, the first watches they released for their first 3 years in business actually had an extra long strap. And this was sort of a carryover or spillover from the fact that most of their watches were designed to be worn over a wetsuit. And so as much as the PAM21 in platinum looks like a dress watch, you have to have about an 8-inch wrist to be able to pull off the strap that comes on the watch, because it's actually 125 millimeters by 95 millimeters. And so the only way to get a new strap on that watch is to send it to Switzerland to get the one that's on there cut off and to have them sew on another one. That's an interesting tidbit that if you've never held or don't know about the PAM21 is sort of one of those facts that people go, wow, I didn't know that. So my final thoughts on the Panerai PAM21 is I don't think in looking back at the history of Panerai, there could have been a better watch to essentially reintroduce this company, this little known Italian company, Officina Panerai, to the rest of the world with. Number one, it was a watch that nobody had really ever seen or take note of. It was audaciously oversized, again, the likes of which the watch world had never seen before on a mainstream basis. And it carried the Rolex name with it. Something that opened immediate doors, immediate eyes, and really opened the hearts of ardent Rolex collectors, which were then forced to look back into the history of Panerai. And once that happened, it was like they were bitten with a bug and they wanted to know more and they wanted to consume more. And this essentially is what set up the path of Panerai releasing special edition and limited edition watches along with their presentation and their materials and their provenance that so many Panerai collectors have always appreciated and always been drawn to. To me, that's what makes the Panerai PAM21 so special. I would say that this would be the very essence of the Panerai DNA. To me, that is what the PAM21 represents.